Welcome to my channel. I'm Elizabeth Liz Muschett, and today it's the Astrology Star Sisters, and my star sister, an astrologer and friend, Madam Simon, is joining me today, and we're going to talk about the Gemini new moon that's out of bounds. Hi, Simon. Welcome.
Thank you, Liz. Glad to be here.
I'm glad you could join me. So, we are going to talk about that Gemini new moon. And Madam Simon's website is iconalchemy.com. She's an archetypal astrologer, tarot reader, and visionary artist. I'm an astrologer, author, intuitive, and numerologist. And my website is alightpath.com. And we're talking about the out of bounds Gemini new moon and about manifesting. So I like to start the process thinking about manifesting, a few days before the new moon, and sometimes I jot down ideas of what do I need to release to make space for the new. And then I might be thinking about it a couple of days before and then on the new moon, but I usually wait and complete my list when I can see the first sliver of the light from the moon. So that's a day or two after. And you can write down your desires and wishes. It could be one, it could be up to 5. And then I like to light a candle to ignite the energy of that. And I say dream big. Would you like to add anything, Madam Simon?
Well, my process is slightly different. During the actual new moon, I tend to be more in this space of meditating on what are the themes of that new moon, so that by the time that first light comes, then I'm in that position to be able to set my intentions. But it's really, I want to be in that kind of space of incubation in the dark of the new moon.
Thank you for sharing. So this new moon in Gemini is on May 26th at 8:02 p.m. Pacific Daylight Time in Seattle. So for the whole west coast of the United States, it's approximately the same time. Gemini is a mutable sign. It's about finishing up and bringing things to completion. Gemini is the air element, very much about communication. And the planetary ruler is Mercury, and new moons are about new beginnings, creative, and initiation. Would you like to add anything?
So the air element is communicative, and therefore there tends to be more of a social vibe to this new moon. We're coming out of Taurus season into Gemini season, and so it's a shift from that grounded energy of Taurus into something much lighter, a little more sparkly. Some social butterfly kind of vibes going on.
Thank you for sharing that. So for Gemini, the mantra is I think, and I already said the ruling planet is Mercury. It's a mutable sign, adaptable, completing, begin complete things to begin something new. Air element and some keywords are ideas, information, multitasking, intellect, student, versatile, sociable, siblings, neighborhoods, and community. And the caution is black and white thinking. And would you want to add anything?
So because Gemini can be very talkative, there is sometimes a danger of being overly talkative. There can also be a bit of scattered squirrel kind of thinking, that ooh, shiny syndrome. Um, and so it can be a bit distractible.
Thank you. And this moon is out of bounds for the new moon. And the out of bounds is when the moon exceeds the declination of 23 degrees and 27 minutes north or south. And when planets are out of bounds, they are out of the bounds of the sun and they act on their own or act out of character. Do you have anything to add?
Not really, no.
So the moon is at 6 degrees of Gemini in 6 minutes. And on Eastern Daylight Time, it's at 11:02 p.m. And the charts I use are for Seattle, Washington. And here's the aspects to this new moon. You want to go ahead and start, Simon?
Right. So, this new moon is conjoining Mercury and Aia. The Sun, Mercury, and Aia all entered into Gemini just this past week. So they're all still really close together. And the all three of them then are trine Pluto. And so right off the bat, that kind of gives them all some extra oomph. Pluto can very much deal with matters of power. And what is our sense of control? And likes to remind us that control, in fact, is an illusion. And so can have us feeling a little out of control. Can really ramp things up. But when we've got a trine aspect like this, both Pluto and this Moon, Sun, Mercury, and Aia are all in these air signs, these very sociable signs. And so I would expect a lot of big talk. But also, because this is in Gemini, Gemini is inclined to move around, okay, to go from topic to topic, to kind of, want a sampling of ideas, and it wants to keep from getting bored, basically. And so it's going to be really interested in a lot of different things. And so, yes, that Pluto definitely makes it bigger, more powerful, and can make us feel a little like, ooh, a little Twitter-pated, a little out of control, right? But I suspect that can also get us into trying new things, being curious, engaging in conversations we might not have thought to have before. And I think that's a very good thing. We also see that this is sextile Ceres, who has moved into Aries recently, and is still separating from a conjunction with Neptune, who is hanging out there with Saturn, who just moved into Aries 2 days prior to this new moon. And so there's a sense of getting the conversations that feed us, getting the conversations that spark our imagination. Okay. But that presence of Saturn there makes it not so frivolous as it might be. I described Gemini as having that social butterfly quality, but this is a bit more serious than just like, la-di-da flitting around, right? There is some weight to this because Saturn is hanging out there and because of that trine to Pluto. But I feel like the seriousness is not unwelcome, right? There's also a quincunx to Vesta, which I think can increase some of the scattered quality because Vesta is about our focus. And when planets are quincunx to each other, they do not share an element and they do not share a modality. So they have difficulty understanding each other. Okay. But all in all, I mean, feels like a very lively new moon. It should be noted that Mercury, who rules Gemini, is now in that condition that is known as being domiciled. Mercury is in their own home. And so they've got all the resources they like. They're in a space where they get to do the things that they like. And so that's very talkative, very communicative, is probably very good for business, and maybe useful for travel as well.
I would agree with that. And I wanted to make a comment about how that conjunction there in Gemini is sextile to Ceres, but you mentioned the Saturn and the Neptune. It's like by talking, the visions or your new dreams or some inspiration from Neptune to create something new or write something new, either by listening to somebody, watching a TV show or a movie, or just talking with your friends can spark that. So make sure you write it down is what I would suggest.
Engaging with your favorite streamers would be
Mhm.
another way to be utilizing some of this energy. And I do find it interesting, since this new moon is conjoining both Mercury and Aia. I think there's a lot of emphasis here on mental health. Okay. So I feel like, and especially with that trine to Pluto, this is a great time for people to engage in therapy. Okay. To engage in journaling as part of their own mental health process. But also, again, to have good, interesting, lively conversations with people about the topics that are going to help us to clear our heads, that are going to help us to, dig deeper into what's going on, both with our mental health individually, but also from a societal standpoint, since Pluto is there in Aquarius, which is very much society oriented, group oriented.
Yes, and this Gemini new moon is an excellent time. I'm going to start some journaling and just like in the morning, spending a few minutes just to write all my thoughts down to like clear space. I'm going to use it as like kind of like a meditation to get me into that space to be more focused.
Right.
So thanks for that reminder. So we have some other aspects here. We have 2 yods, finger of God, which are quincunx 150 degrees from each other, 2 planets pointing to one, a focal point, and then those 2 planets being sextile to each other, 60 degrees apart from each other. So I'll let you jump in there, Simon.
Okay. So we've got, let's see, I think I'm going to start out with the Mercury Neptune sextile, that is pointing to Black Moon Lilith. Okay. Specifically because that Mercury Neptune sextile more directly draws in the energy of the new moon, through a process that is known as translation of light, where one planet that is close to another is effectively bringing in the light from a planet that is not actually as closely in aspect. So in this case, Mercury is translating the light of Neptune, and Saturn actually as well, to the new moon. Okay. And so this definitely is, I would say it's very much about imagination. But because of that co-presence of Saturn there's also, it's about serious imagination. It's about, really considering what are the long-term possibilities for what we are envisioning. Okay. And it's important to remember that because Saturn is there, we don't want to let our imaginations run away with us in ways that could be fearful, catastrophizing, conspiracy theory kind of stuff, any of that, right? Instead, when fears come up, we may be able to engage with them in a spirit of what Pema Chodron calls friendly curiosity, which I think is very much something that a Gemini new moon with Mercury, conjoining it, is very good at, okay? Capable of, examining our fears, our concerns from this standpoint of, not like, oh my goodness, that's something I don't want to deal with, but rather, oh, why is it I'm afraid of that? Why is it I'm concerned with that? Why do I feel insecure about that? And again, I very much feel like the social quality of this can be helpful at getting perspective. But because Black Moon Lilith is involved.
Can you give us a brief description of Black Moon Lilith for those that don't know? Thank you.
Okay. So Black Moon Lilith is an empty point in space. When the moon is orbiting the Earth, it's not a circular orbit. It's actually an elliptical orbit. And the Earth is one of two foci within that elliptical orbit. And so the moon is orbiting both of them effectively. And so when the moon is a supermoon, the moon is at the point that is closest to the Earth. But when the moon is, what is it? Oh, I can't remember the proper name for it. It's where it appears smaller in the sky.
Is it perigee?
It's actually at the lunar apogee. But there's another name for it that sounds like supermoon but is smaller. I just can't remember it. Anyway, when it's at the lunar apogee on the other side, okay, it appears smaller in the sky than it does for the supermoons. That lunar apogee area lines up with that second focus, okay? And that empty space is Black Moon Lilith. Okay, so we are using the natural or interpolated position of Black Moon Lilith here. And Lilith relates to our authentic selves, but specifically an unconscious, very, honest expression of ourselves, particularly of our more feminine awareness, but it tends to be rejected, alienated, demonized. It does not fit into typical social standards. Okay. And so here we have this interesting combination, with that Mercury conjoining Aia and the new moon, and then sextile Neptune, who's hanging out there with Saturn and Ceres. And so there's this, all of these planets together are kind of in cahoots and saying, we're interested in, what is our imagination, our vision telling us? What are our thoughts and conversations telling us? How do we make a more mentally healthy environment for ourselves? What nourishes, what actions are going to really feed us, okay, and feed good mental health for ourselves? And that in turn puts this pressure on the parts of us that feel alienated, rejected, antisocial, inclined to maybe run wild and do things differently from everybody else, and, express ourselves in ways that may be difficult to understand. So I find this really interesting because it's this there are parts of all of us that we may have difficulty understanding or expressing in socially acceptable ways, and yet they deserve for us to pay attention to them. And I think that goes back to what I was saying earlier about the need to get to be curious about these parts rather than just going, oh my goodness, I can't believe I did that, right? So that's that yod. Then we've got the other one, which is Pallas Athena, who is sextile Chiron and Eris, who are having their big conjunction real soon. Okay. And one of three, actually, thanks to retrograde action. And they are pointing at the South Node up there in Virgo. Okay. So, Pallas Athena, name for the Greek goddess of wisdom, but also textiles, weaving, and warfare.
What a combination.
What a combination. But you can see, actually, the notion of weaving actually can relate to planning. How do you plan out, particularly when you are weaving beautiful tapestries, okay? When you are weaving patterns, there is a serious need for planning and complex thought. And then warfare, of course, requires tactical thinking. Okay. And so Pallas relates to, yes, our wisdom, but in particular, our strategic thought, our ability to plan, our ability to engage in high concept thinking with outcomes that are desirable, right? Where we're really trying to think on higher levels, to deal with both abstract and practical thought that is going to have consequences, right? And so in combination with that Chiron Eris conjunction that is happening, this then is planning, strategic thinking that relates to addressing areas where we feel like we may not have great executive function, where we may not have good decision making, where we may feel weak or wounded, where we may be struggling, but also, interestingly enough, because of the presence of Eris, where we might be inclined to say, heck with it, burn it all down. Okay. I think that's a really interesting kind of balancing act going on there with that sextile, because, Pallas is typically not going to, say, oh, heck with it. Stuff, right? She's not going to just like toss things. She's going to carefully plan things out. And yet here she is in that sextile with Eris in particular, who is like, let's let the air out of somebody's tires. Let's deflate the stuffed shirts. Let's point out the hypocrisy within our social structures. Okay. And in Eris in Aries is a doubling down of some warrior themes, but conjoining Chiron, then it becomes the wounded warrior. Okay. So veterans issues I would expect to see highlighted, with the Chiron Eris conjunction, and then the Pallas sextile says, how can we plan around some of these concerns? Okay. They are both pointing then, or, both of these signs, these planets in these signs are pointing to the South Node. The South Node in Virgo, the South Node is a releasing point, okay? It is, karmically speaking, it is where we are coming from, where we may be very comfortable, but in fact, now we have to learn to let go of some of that in order to move toward the North Node and learn new lessons, right? And so in Virgo, that South Node very much is saying, you know what? Not all of the I's are going to be dotted and all of the T's crossed. Okay? Not all of the details that you want to have addressed will be addressed. Things will not be perfect. You cannot solve everything through logic alone. Okay? And you're going to have to let that go. You're going to have to be willing to let some things fall by the wayside. Because especially under a Gemini New Moon, there's lots of information. There's so many details, and Virgo likes details, right? Is ruled by Mercury, just like Gemini is. And yet, there comes a point when there are too many balls in the air to keep juggling. Too much to manage. And so something's going to have to fall by the wayside.
That's wonderful. And tune back in, because in a day or two, we're going to do an episode on the Chiron conjunct Eris with more information on that. So we have some T-squares and a square. And T-squares are 3 planets that are square each other. So one opposition, and then those 2 opposite are square to another one. So go ahead.
Okay. Let's see. We've got Juno squaring Pallas Athena, and squaring Mars. And Mars rules Scorpio traditionally, where Juno is. So Juno is answering to Mars, but still kind of sassing Mars, right? When we've got these square aspects, they're at odds with each other on some level, okay? Now, Mars opposing Pallas suggests that our actions are at odds with our wisdom. Okay. Now, the interesting thing about an opposition is that the 2 planets in opposition can see each other very clearly. So they are very aware of each other. But, they're kind of giving each other that look like, yeah, what are you doing right in my face? I really don't want to work with you. I don't want to get along with you. I want to do my own thing. Okay. But nonetheless, they have a relationship with each other by that aspect. And so it becomes something of a balancing act. And when we're looking at oppositions, it can be kind of, there's this like, seesaw back and forth, or a tug of war, right? In terms of how are we getting our needs met? How are each of the planets getting their needs met? And it can take a while to stabilize that energy. Now, in this case, it's fixed energy, so it's a little more stable to begin with, but it also means that the planets in question are a bit more obstinate. Okay. They're going to get mulish with each other. Okay. And be resistant. And so this is really interesting, because in combination with that Juno, I've talked before on your show about how Juno in Scorpio, currently retrograde, is reconsidering what are our commitments. Okay. And that can be commitments on, a one-on-one interpersonal level, or it can be commitments on a broader social level. I very much think that this Juno in Scorpio, currently retrograde, is reconsidering, what is the social contract? What is the social fabric that we are, seeing unravel in a lot of ways right in front of our eyes? Okay. Where are we committed to upholding certain standards, certain ideals, laws, promises? Okay. And where are we now saying, I don't agree with that. I don't like that. I don't want to put my time and energy into it, especially if I feel like the other party involved is not putting their time and energy and commitment into it, because it's Scorpio, right? And so with Scorpio, there can be this awareness of power dynamics underneath the surface that in turn can have us feeling a little distrustful, a little like, hey, I see you getting up to some stuff over there, right? I don't know now if I can trust you on other things, because I see over here where you've been not living up to certain standards. Okay. And there can also be this kind of, almost apocalyptic feeling we're looking at Scorpio, because Scorpio is about, among other things, transformation, including the cycle of death and rebirth. Okay. And so that can get people like really up in their feelings. Okay. They're really deep, intense feelings about their commitments, and whether or not those commitments are something they want to stick to, whether or not they're valid, whether or not the other party is holding up their end of the bargain. Okay. And so I really feel like this T-square then is, we're going to see some people doing things that are ill-advised. And, in some cases, maybe tossing the baby out with the bathwater, right? And so there is a need to pay attention to, okay, if I'm going to say, no, I really am not going to stick with this commitment. No, this partnership or this relationship or this social interaction is not serving me anymore. I need to make sure that if I'm going to be making some drastic moves, do you really want to burn that bridge or not? If you do, you'd better have a plan, a palace, right, for how you're going to deal with the aftermath. Okay. So then we also see that Pallas is involved in another square with Juno and Uranus. Okay. So we're taking all of those themes about our commitments, our promises, who we're allied with and who we're not, and what is our planning surrounding that? Are we making wise decisions surrounding that? But now we're throwing Uranus into the mix, and Uranus is sudden, shocking change, is the rebel spirit, is, the great liberator, but also can, a bit like Eris, in fact, can kind of stir the pot just for the sake of stirring the pot, right? I do think it's always important when Uranus is involved that we strive to stay as flexible as we can be in order to adapt to big changes, while at the same time be careful about rebellion for rebellion's sake. I say this as someone with Uranus at my ascendant, so I'm very guilty of those Uranian tendencies at times. But yeah, there are big changes afoot. whether we're looking at on the social level, the mundane astrology level, what's going on in the world at large, or whether we're looking at the personal level, and how much it affects us individually largely depends on how these transits interact with our own charts. Okay. And finally, that square with Pluto square Lilith, that's been going on for a little bit. And that Pluto Lilith square, we actually saw that during the Pluto Mars square. Okay. Mars is no longer an orb of that, but we're still carrying forward some reverberations from that. And so with Pluto square Lilith, we see this kind of, we have this authentic awareness of how we feel about the power dynamics in our lives, especially when it comes to institutional power, when it comes to things that are bigger than ourselves that we feel like we cannot control. But we also can be very reactive. And again, because these are in fixed signs, we can be very stubborn. This adds to feelings of rebellion, but it is more under the surface. Uranus rebellion is kind of, out there and in your face and, a little bit more conscious. But with Lilith and Pluto, they deal very much with unconscious processes. And so you can get people being willful in ways that they aren't really thinking about, right? That they're just doing it and they don't even know why they're doing it. Okay. And that kind of reactivity, then people can engage in antisocial behaviors where, again, it upsets the apple cart. And people around them may be wondering what on earth is going on. Okay. Because they're not seeing what's hanging out under the surface. They're not seeing the subconscious things that are triggering this. Okay. So point being, it's real easy to get triggered during this time, kind of suddenly, on a dime without realizing what's going on, because we've got that other T square that's triggering Uranus at the same time. So, but if we're being very aware and conscious, as I was talking about with those yods, and specifically with that beautiful sextile with the new moon and Mercury and Aia, all in this lovely sextile with Saturn, Neptune, and Ceres, and then trine to Pluto, there is the possibility for doing some really powerful thinking and communication that actually helps us address these more subconscious processes.
And I wanted to make a comment that the two T squares here could really form a grand fixed cross, but that Mars square Uranus is a little bit out of orb for what the orb pattern that I use, and I believe you too. So that's why I did them as two T squares, but it still kind of has the hint of a fixed grand cross with it, because of all the planets involved.
Right, and it's still pulling in some of the energy from the Pluto, the Mars Pluto opposition that happened at the end of April, because that square with Lilith is still going on, and that square with Lilith was happening during that.
And then we have some other aspects here to look at. We have a talent or a mini grand trine, and I think you call it something different, if I remember.
Minor grand trine is what I call it, but yeah.
And so we have two of them here. So go ahead and pick one and start.
Okay. Well, so we've got this ongoing minor grand trine that's been happening with all three of the outer planets, with Uranus and Neptune and Pluto, and now Saturn's joined in the game, right? This has been happening off and on over the past year. We've seen it kind of go in and out of orb, and we'll continue to be seeing that, especially as Uranus gets closer to its entry into Gemini this summer. That will be the third of the outer planets to switch signs from yin sign, earth and water are the yin signs, to a yang sign, the air and fire signs. Okay, so this is a big elemental shift that's been going on with all three of the outer planets, and the outer planets deal with world issues, with larger social issues, but really affect kind of generational concerns. Okay, they reflect the zeitgeist, and so we've got all of them are in this supportive alignment with each other, and Saturn is also conjoining Neptune. So this is like some big, that's when you feel big, powerful forces at work in your life, right? From a tarot standpoint, it would be big, major arcana energy that we see going on. And so, that very much goes along with the notion that we're living through interesting times, right? But here it is, these things that are harbingers of interesting times are all working together. Now, on one hand, we can certainly say, the minor grand trine is a supportive setup. And it's definitely, I would rather see this than to see them all in hard aspect together, right? But because they are these big transpersonal forces at work and they're all in cahoots together, that can still be intense, right? It's one thing if they're all operating independently of each other, but when they're all working together, we've got the change represented by Uranus. We've got the vision, but also the confusion represented by Neptune. Okay, our beliefs and ideologies that can be caught up in that, shaped by that, and then Pluto with the power dynamics, especially the rich and powerful who manipulate so much of what is going on. And all of that, of course, revealing to us, what's rotten in Denmark, what needs to be addressed, what it needs to be transformed, what is overripe and stinking and needs to be composted. Okay. And so all of that together, plus Saturn, okay, who reminds us, there's going to be long-term consequences for what you envision now. Okay. There are going to be long-term consequences to what you believe, to what you imagine, to what is stirring you on spiritual levels, on ideological levels. There will be consequences, not just to you, but because this is transpersonal, it's on the societal level. And that's big and intense and can feel a little overwhelming, even though it is in a supportive configuration, right? The important thing to remember about that is that it does say, we're living through these transformational times. And so what we choose to believe about those times, how we allow our imaginations to shape our experience of these times, is going to have a profound effect for better or for worse. So why not do our best to make it the better? Right? Why not lead with love rather than with fear? Okay. And embrace that with big, powerful changes in the world, there are powerful possibilities. Okay. So we've got that on one side. Then we've also got kind of in this, like, they're not overlapping in terms of sharing planets, but they're overlapping in terms of sharing signs and space together. We've got Pallas Athena is trine Jupiter, and they are both sextile that Chiron Eris conjunction. So, as Liz said, we're going to talk more about Chiron and Eris at another point in time, but Chiron and Eris together really can dredge up our some of our more challenging wounds. In particular, there can be this kind of because of the presence of Eris there can be this kind of belligerence about what hurts us, okay, or about where we feel weak, where we feel incapable. There is also the sense of kind of this need to poke at the wound, it almost in order to make ourselves or others aware of it, okay, to bring attention to it. And so, that can be personal if you happen to have planets in the third decan of the cardinal signs. That would be Aries, Cancer, Libra, and Capricorn. Okay. And it is also playing out on the world stage in a lot of ways. Okay. And so, it definitely relates a lot to the wounds of warfare, to the ways in which conflict comes or grows out of wounding. That saying, hurt people. Okay. And then that is at the apex of this minor grand trine with Pallas, goddess of warfare. Okay. Who is trine Jupiter. Now, in Greek myth, Pallas Athena was not born to a goddess. Pallas Athena sprung from her father, Zeus's head, fully formed and armored. Okay, armed and armored, coming out of his splitting headache. Okay, and so Pallas has a relationship with Jupiter, who is the Roman form of the god Zeus. Okay, and so she's in cahoots with her father here, who, yes, Jupiter can relate to our faith, our hope, our opportunities, our good luck, but also government. Okay. And so I do expect that this minor grand trine will continue to inform the conflicts that are going on the world stage, and how governments are engaging with them, particularly with Pallas in Aquarius, co-present with Pluto, that has seen the rise of AI. Okay. And Jupiter, of course, having been in Gemini, there's been this correspondence with big data. And so I suspect we will see more things pertaining to AI, and big data, and how are they being used in connection with both conflict and healing. Okay. So that can be, again, on levels relating to mental health, right? I definitely think this new moon has a lot to do with mental health. That would be a more positive iteration of this energy. But I think we're also going to have to address some of the ways in which the world that we currently are experiencing and the difficulties that we're experiencing with it are the result of widespread wounding, of multi-generational wounding, of ancestral trauma that has never been addressed, of cultural wounding, old wounds, like slavery, like genocide, like colonialism. Those things are all kind of coming to a head with this combination. So, how do we utilize our wisdom palace and our faith in the potential for healing these wounds, our faith in the ability to address them, maybe in some ways they're kind of blunt, thanks to Eris. Okay. So, not the most, cozy and lovey kind of feeling to that minor grand trine, but potentially one that helps us get our heads in better space, right? Helps us address the problems rather than putting our heads in the sand.
Absolutely. Talking about it, writing about it, speaking about it, very important. And especially with the Gemini New Moon, it goes right along with the moon that we're in of how to work with that energy.
Right. And reading and processing. Gemini likes books too.
Yes, because there's lots of self-help books that would be, very helpful, but writing things down, journaling, getting a therapist, taking
Also
time for yourself.
informing ourselves about what's going on.
Absolutely.
So
Thank you. That was beautiful. And I'm going to share about the lunar phase family or gestation phase. It uses the 4 lunar phases that we have each month. But in this way, each phase is a 9-month period of time, and it was discovered by Pessin, and there's a book that she wrote about it. So there's and I can't remember the name of the book, but if somebody wants it, they can send me an email and I'll send them the name of the book. So and it starts with each new moon. So every new moon, there's a bigger cycle than just from new to the next new moon, because that would be the monthly cycle. This is a 3-year cycle. So this begins the new phase at 6 degrees Gemini. And then we have the first quarter in February of 2026, and then the full phase November 24th of 2026, and then the third quarter phase in August of 2027. So what you begin now, like I'm going to start journaling and what I call kind of a mind dump of writing, just kind of whether it's 5 minutes or 15, I'm not sure how long it'll be, and to see how this phase plays out. I like to think of this phase, and if you journal, you can always go back and look at things too, or if you keep good records somehow. But it's like what you start now, it could be a big project. Like if you're going to write a book, I mean, some people can write a book really fast and it just takes them a few months, but a lot of times it takes a long period of time. So if you want to write or journal, it's like see what happens, or start a business. Lots of times it takes a while to create the business and find a place that you're going to house the business and all the things. So it's a fun thing to follow, and I just wanted to put it out there for people. And then the
Um,
yearly lunar phase, go ahead.
oh, can we go back to that slide for a moment? It
Sure.
just hit me. That first quarter date, that's right around the time of the big conjunction between Saturn and Neptune at 0 degrees of Aries next year. So I
Yeah.
find it really interesting. We've got that sextile with Saturn and Neptune with the ruler of this new moon at the time of this new moon. And then that first quarter, we're going to get that conjunction again. So sorry to interrupt about that. I just had to point that out because I feel like, oh my goodness.
Well, and the first quarter would be like the new phase would be starting a project, and the first quarter is making adjustments and changes. Because lots of times when you start out with a project, you don't know all the details or how it's going to work. Because you could say, "Oh, I want to start a business in Seattle." Well, um, they don't have a big enough space, or it's beyond your budget. So maybe you have to do it a little farther north or a little farther south or east or west. So making those adjustments and changes can be very simple. And then we can also look at the lunar phases in a yearly cycle. So we're beginning the Gemini New Moon, and then and this will be on May 26th. I think I missed the date on the one before. And then the Gemini full moon will be in December of 2025 on the 4th, and at 13 degrees. So, sometimes you can accomplish things in one year. So it's like I've kind of given you things to look at in different prospects and ways to look at it. So, what would you like to leave people with that they can take away?
Curiosity,
Oh,
the
awesome.
Gemini virtue. Um, Being curious about things, um, not simply, making an assumption that things reflect what their face value is. Um, Gemini does tend to skim surfaces normally, but this Gemini new moon is trine Pluto and therefore has the capacity to go deeper. Um, and to do so in this state of curiosity and interest and excitement about things being, something to explore, rather than necessarily, oh my goodness, the state of the world, right? Instead, like, oh, let's pull on some strings and find out what that's attached to. I think that is a fabulous Gemini virtue to focus on for this new moon.
Well, thank you for that. And I would say, like, if you want to learn something new, maybe take a class or a conference, journal, um, do research. This is a good time for research, all that.
Mm-hmm.
And I want
Yeah,
to thank you, Simon, for joining me today. I really appreciate it.
thank you
And
for having me.
and the next slide, I'll let Simon tell you about her Patreon page.
So I have a little space on Patreon where I write about the ongoing transits, regularly let people know what's happening in the skies, and then I also do custom astrological art for my patrons, and I like to relate imagery in general to what's going on. So I typically post images with my talk about the transits and relate them to what's going on. And like Liz, I am a consulting astrologer. Um, and so if you wish to schedule a consultation with me, I'm available at iconalchemy.com.
Thank you. And like Simon said, I do consultations, and you can reach me at alightpath.com. I have a newsletter you can sign up for, and like and subscribe to my YouTube channel. Thank you. And there's a lot of other upcoming shows on my channel that you can choose from. We have a good variety of stuff. And I will be on Talk Cosmos talking about the Gemini New Moon on May 25th. And thank you again, Simon. I really appreciate you being here today. And we're going to say goodbye for now to the audience, and we'll see you next time.